As with all topics in anatomy, when you're starting to learn about skeletal muscles and the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle, there's some new terminology that you need to learn. So you need, in essence, to learn a new language when you're learning about A&P. We know that endo means within. Anytime you see MY or MYO, my or myo, we are talking about muscle, and it's usually skeletal muscle. So if you look at endomysium, that top term there, or the third or fourth terms down, you will see that root MY in each of those. So let's go and talk about what these things are. All right, these are the terms, and I'm going to flip to the next slide, and we're going to go over what each of these means while you have a visual. This is a bone, and there's a tendon, and we know that tendons attach muscle to bone, so that is what this is demonstrating. Let's start with the most superficial layer that's shown on this diagram. Epimysium is going to be around a muscle, and it means, or it stands for, a connective tissue covering around a muscle. When you talk about perimysium, you're going to see that term here, and it looks like the connective tissue covering, because we're talking about a connective tissue covering, sort of is wrapping around a whole bunch of things. And then you see endomysium, which is endo means within. So what? All right, so here's a muscle fiber. The muscle fiber is going to have a cell membrane, which is known as a sarcolemma, S-A-R-C-O, lemma, L-E-M-M-A, and we'll talk about that in the next section. That sarcolemma is going to be surrounded by an endomysium, which is a connective tissue covering. When you take a bunch of muscle fibers, remember the name muscle fiber is interchangeable with the term muscle cell. You take a bunch of muscle fibers and you wrap them in with connective tissue, you have what's known as a fascicle. So a collection of muscle fibers is a fascicle, and that fascicle will be covered by another connective tissue covering, which is known as the perimysium. When you take a collection of fascicles and cover them by the epimysium, that outermost connective tissue covering, you have a muscle belly. So let's go over that again. Muscle fiber, the actual cell membrane of a muscle fiber, has a specific name, which is a sarcolemma. That sarcolemma will be surrounded by the endomysium, a connective tissue covering. When you take multiple muscle fibers and bundle them together, you have a fascicle. That fascicle will be covered by another connective tissue covering, which is known as the perimysium. When you collect a number of fascicles together, they will all be covered by yet another connective tissue covering, which is the epimysium. And that gives you a muscle belly. Let's go back to this. We've talked about endomysium, we've talked about fascicles, we've talked about perimysium, we've talked about epimysium. There's that term fascia, which someone mentioned a few classes ago. So fascia is connective tissue, and it is going to cover pretty much every structure and organ in the body. And sure enough, the fascia of a muscle is going to surround the epimysium, and that's going to provide more support, more structure, and enable the muscle to sort of be anchored to the structures around it. An aponeurosis is a broad, flat tendon. An aponeurosis is a broad, flat tendon, and there are going to be a couple of major ones which you'll need to know, which we'll discuss as we move through the actual skeletal muscles. A tendon, of course, is going to be a connective tissue structure that connects a muscle to bone.